The friend I trusted most at work did the unthinkable. She lied about me to steal the promotion I had worked so hard for. She thought her scheme would leave me humiliated, but she never imagined I had the proof that would expose her in front of the entire office. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I still remember the day my boss called me into his office. His expression tight, his tone clipped. It was a moment that changed the way I saw not only my workplace but also the woman I had once called my best friend. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Instead, he folded his hands on the desk and said, "We've received some troubling feedback about you." Those words hit me like ice water. I sat there, stunned, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was hearing. Troubling feedback about me? I had always been known for my reliability, my calm under pressure, my ability to keep projects moving when others faltered. If anything, I was the one people leaned on when things got messy. What kind of feedback? I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice even. Though my stomach had already twisted into a hard knot, he sighed, almost as if he hated having to say it. Missed deadlines. Taking credit for work that wasn't yours. Spreading gossip about team members. Frankly, behavior unbecoming of someone being considered for a leadership role. Each accusation felt like a blow. Missed deadlines? I was the one who stayed late to make sure projects got across the finish line. Taking credit for someone else's work, that was the kind of dishonesty I despised. Gossiping? I had always prided myself on keeping work professional, even when drama flared around me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind reeled through recent weeks, searching for anything that could have been twisted into this ugly caricature of me. But nothing fit. Nothing made sense. And then, in a rush of clarity that felt like a slap, it clicked. Her, my so-called best friend. She was the only one who stood to gain from tearing me down. We had both been quietly vying for the same promotion. At first, it had been a friendly rivalry. We joked about whoever got it owing the other a celebratory dinner. But in the weeks leading up to the decision, I had noticed her behavior shift. She had started staying late when the boss was around, making sure her effort was seen. She dropped subtle comments in meetings about some people not carrying their weight. And she asked more probing questions about my projects than usual, as if she were fishing for information. Still, I had brushed it off. I believed she was competitive, not malicious. But now, sitting in my boss's office, hearing these fabricated complaints, I knew she hadn't just been competing. She had been actively sabotaging me. It's difficult to describe the mix of emotions that washed over me. There was the immediate sting of betrayal because this wasn't just a colleague. This was a woman I had confided in, shared lunches with, laughed with after long days. I had trusted her, both as a coworker and as a friend. And she had taken that trust, twisted it, and weaponized it against me. But alongside the hurt was something colder, sharper. Resolve. I didn't argue with my boss right then. I didn't defend myself with desperate words. Instead, I nodded, asked him to share specifics, and promised I would review the concerns carefully. Inside, though, my mind was already shifting gears. I was no longer wondering if she had crossed a line. I was asking myself just how far she had gone and how I was going to prove it. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let her lies destroy everything I had worked for. That day marked the beginning of a battle I hadn't asked for, but one I was determined to win. She thought she could smear my name in whispers and climb over me to claim the role I deserved. But what she didn't realize was that lies have a way of unraveling when faced with the truth. And I was going to make sure every single thread came undone. In order to truly understand the depth of what happened, I need to take you back to the beginning, before the accusations, before the betrayal, before the office felt like a battlefield. For years, I had built a reputation at work as someone who could be depended on. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room or the person who craved constant attention. Instead, I thrived on consistency. If there was a problem, people knew I'd find a way through it. If a deadline loomed, they knew I'd stay until the lights in the building dimmed to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I had worked my way up steadily, earning quiet respect, even from those who weren't quick to give it. That's who I was. Reliable. Grounded. I prided myself on doing things the right way, even if it meant putting in more effort than most. And then there was her. When she first joined the company, I genuinely liked her. She was charismatic in a way that drew people in. She had a bright laugh, the kind that made you feel lighter just hearing it. And she had an uncanny ability to make herself at home wherever she went. For a long time, I admired that about her. Where I was steady, she was dynamic. Where I preferred to hang back, she thrived in the spotlight. We became friends quickly, or at least I thought we did. Lunch breaks turned into therapy sessions. We'd vent about the little frustrations of office life, the endless meetings that could have been emails, the outdated software that froze at the worst times, the occasional clients who thought they knew better than the professionals they'd hired. In those moments, she felt like a confidante, someone I could trust to understand the pressures of our work. She would often tell me, half joking, "We're going to take over this place one day." I laughed it off, never thinking much of it. At that point, I saw no warning signs. If anything, I believed we balanced each other well. My quiet diligence, her magnetic presence, it felt like the kind of partnership that could make both of us stronger. But looking back, the cracks started to show long before I realized what they meant. The first time I felt something shift was during a team meeting. We were discussing the progress of a large project that I had been coordinating for weeks. Out of nowhere, she made a quip about how some of us were struggling to keep up. She said it with a laugh, that light tone that could be brushed off as harmless teasing. But the room went a little quieter than usual. I felt the sting of it, though I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. Later, she brushed it off when I asked her about it. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she said. "I was just joking. You know me." I told myself she didn't mean harm. That's what you do when you care about someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But it wasn't just one comment. It became a pattern. Little remarks, always in front of others, where she would downplay something I'd done or subtly highlight her own contributions. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I felt it, the beginning of competition, creeping into what I thought was a friendship. Still, I didn't confront her. I reminded myself that workplaces are stressful, that sometimes people say things they don't mean. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that our friendship was stronger than whatever ambition might be pushing her in those moments. Then came the promotion announcement. A new managerial role was opening, one that both of us had quietly dreamed about. When she first heard the news, she grinned at me across our desks. "May the best woman win," she said, her eyes gleaming with a kind of playfulness I wanted to believe was genuine at the time. I didn't doubt her. I thought it was possible for us to both want the same thing and still respect one another. But ambition is a strange thing. It can twist people in ways you don't expect, and in her case, it began to reveal parts of her I had never truly seen before: the insecurity, the hunger for recognition, the way she seemed to believe the world owed her a shortcut to success. Back then, though, I was still blind to it. I still thought of her as my friend, as the person who had shared late-night coffees with me, who had celebrated birthdays with me, who had seemed to genuinely care. And maybe that's why her betrayal cut so deep. Because before everything fell apart, I trusted her. I let her in. I believed the friendship we had built was real. But as I would soon learn, I had mistaken ambition for loyalty. And the cost of that mistake would hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. The real fracture in our friendship came quietly, without warning. In a single conversation that felt ordinary at first. I was sitting at my desk late one afternoon, sifting through a report that needed polishing before the next day's client meeting, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my boss's assistant, asking if I could step into his office. I didn't think much of it. Requests like that weren't unusual. I tidied up my desk, straightened my blazer, and walked down the corridor, rehearsing in my head whether he might want updates on the progress of my latest project. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. His posture was stiff, his expression carefully neutral, like someone preparing to deliver bad news. He gestured for me to sit, then folded his hands. "I need to discuss a few concerns," he said. His tone was calm, but there was weight behind it, a kind of gravity that made the air feel heavier. "Concerns." He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady on mine. "We've heard reports that you've missed multiple deadlines recently, that you've been distracted, and there are also some troubling comments suggesting you may have taken credit for work that wasn't yours." For a moment, the words didn't register. It was as if my mind rejected them outright, scrambling to find a foothold in a reality that had suddenly tilted sideways. Missed deadlines, me? I was the one who stayed late to avoid missed deadlines. Taking credit for someone else's work, that was the opposite of everything I stood for. I must have looked confused because he added, "And there's also the matter of gossip. Some of the team feel you've been less than professional in how you've spoken about colleagues." I stared at him, my mouth dry. Gossip. I had worked hard to keep personal feelings out of professional spaces. I wasn't perfect, of course. Who doesn't vent now and then? But I never spread rumors. The thought that my reputation was being dismantled in whispers behind my back felt surreal, almost absurd. Finally, I managed. "Who said this?" He shook his head. "That's not the point. The point is that it's being said, and perception matters, especially with a promotion on the line." The promotion, of course. It all snapped into focus like a lens clicking into place. I thought back to the lunches, the late-night talks, the playful competition, the subtle digs in meetings, the way she'd been lingering more around our boss lately, positioning herself in the right place at the right time. And suddenly, the truth became undeniable. It was her, my so-called friend. She had gone from teasing comments and subtle jabs to outright fabrication. And she had done it with precision, targeting the very qualities I was most proud of. My reliability, my integrity, my professionalism. I felt something inside me harden, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Betrayal is sharp in a way few emotions are. It cuts deeper than anger, deeper than frustration. It leaves you questioning not only the person who hurt you but also yourself, your judgment, your ability to trust. I sat in that office, keeping my voice even, because I knew losing control would only make things worse. "I see," I said slowly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll look into it." Inside, though, a fire had started to burn. This wasn't just competition anymore. This was war. She hadn't simply angled for a promotion, she had deliberately painted me as incompetent, as dishonest, to elevate herself. And if I didn't act, her lies would become the truth by sheer repetition. As I walked back to my desk, the office suddenly felt different. The walls that once felt safe now echoed with suspicion. Every glance from a coworker carried new weight. Did they believe the rumors? Did they see me as the person she described? And when I passed her desk, she looked up and smiled. That same bright, easy smile I had once taken comfort in. Only now, I saw it for what it was. A mask. A carefully constructed facade covering the rot beneath. That was the moment the line was crossed. She had chosen her path, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't go back to the way things were from then on. My friendship with her was over. The only thing that remained was a fight for my name, my reputation, and my future. After that meeting with my boss, I walked back to my desk in a daze, clutching the edges of my chair just to steady myself. On the outside, I kept my face composed. Inside, though, my thoughts were in chaos. The accusations against me weren't just vague whispers anymore, they were becoming accepted as fact. And if I didn't do something, those lies would stain me permanently. At first, I wondered if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe my boss was just misinformed. Maybe this would blow over. But within days, it became clear. She wasn't done. In fact, she was doubling down. It started in meetings. She had a way of weaving little barbs into her comments without ever saying my name directly. If someone mentioned a project, she'd tilt her head and remark, "Well, as long as everyone's keeping up this time." People would chuckle politely, but I could feel their eyes flick toward me, just for a moment. Or she'd raise her eyebrows when discussing workload and add, "Some of us had to pick up the slack recently." Always delivered with a laugh, always framed as a casual observation, but always sharp enough to draw blood. I tried to brush it off, to keep my professionalism intact, but I could feel the weight of suspicion building around me. And she knew it. Then came the late nights. I had always stayed late to make sure my work was flawless. But suddenly, she was doing it too. Except her timing was uncanny. She would make sure to be at her desk when the boss was still around. Papers spread across her workspace, fingers flying across the keyboard, as if she were single-handedly holding the company together. One evening, I passed by her desk as I was leaving. She looked up at me with that same bright smile and said, "Oh, heading out already? I just want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow. You know how it is." Her tone was light, almost sweet, but the implication was clear. I was leaving while she was staying to make things perfect. I bit my tongue, forcing a polite nod, but inside, my jaw ached from the effort of holding back. The gossip grew louder, too. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would pause just a fraction of a second too long. When I asked for updates on a project, one coworker hesitated before handing me the files, as if second-guessing whether I should even be involved. The atmosphere had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. And then, one afternoon, I overheard her in the hallway. She was speaking with another colleague, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "I mean, I'm not saying she's bad at her job," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. "But you've noticed, right? The mistakes, the lack of initiative? It's hard to see her in a leadership position when she's struggling so much already." The colleague gave a non-committal murmur, but I didn't need to hear more. My blood ran cold. It was one thing to undermine me in private, another to fabricate lies for the boss, but now she was planting seeds in the minds of my peers. 2. She wasn't just competing. She was actively rewriting my reputation in real time. That was the moment I realized how dangerous she was. She had the charm, the confidence, and the timing to make her lies believable. And because she delivered them with a smile, people accepted them without question. They wanted to believe her because she made it easy. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning in shadows, always reacting, always trying to defend myself against rumors I hadn't even heard yet. But through the anger and the hurt, another feeling began to take root: determination. If she wanted to play this game, fine. But I wasn't going to fight it with the same underhanded tactics. I wasn't going to sink to her level. What I needed was proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. Still, that realization hadn't come yet. At this point, all I had was the mounting weight of betrayal pressing on my shoulders and the growing knowledge that if I didn't find a way to stop her, she was going to succeed. And the thought of watching her sit in the chair that should have been mine, that was something I couldn't bear. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my career. Each time she smirked across the conference table, each time she dropped another sly comment, each time my boss's gaze lingered on me with that quiet doubt, I felt my patience wearing thinner until finally the breaking point came. There's only so much a person can take before something inside them snaps. For me, that moment came during what should have been a routine evaluation meeting. By then, weeks had passed since the first accusation surfaced. I had been trying to keep my head down, working harder than ever, determined that my actions would speak louder than her lies. But her whispers had already spread like wildfire. The office had grown colder. Where I used to be greeted with smiles, now I was met with cautious nods. People avoided eye contact just a little too often. It was subtle, but I felt it everywhere. The day of the evaluation, I walked into the conference room with my notes neatly organized, ready to defend my track record if I had to. My boss sat across from me, flanked by two senior managers. Their expressions were polite but guarded, as though they were already bracing for disappointment. The first few questions were standard enough. Updates on client projects, status reports, metrics. I answered them clearly, calmly, even though my pulse was hammering in my throat. I thought, maybe this was my chance to steady the ground again. Then one of the managers leaned forward. "Can you explain what happened with the Whitman account?" My brow furrowed. The Whitman account. That wasn't even mine. I had never been assigned to it. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Could you clarify?" They exchanged a quick glance before my boss spoke. "We've heard you mishandled key deliverables. That your lack of follow-through caused serious delays." For a heartbeat, I couldn't even form words. Mishandled? Lack of follow-through? On a project I had never touched? It was so absurd that I almost laughed, except there was nothing funny about it. I swallowed hard. With respect, I wasn't on the Whitman account. I've never had access to their files. "Are you certain you have the right person?" There was a long pause. My boss shuffled some papers, frowning. "The reports we received named you directly." And there it was, clear as day. She hadn't just implied or hinted anymore. She had fabricated an entire story, pinned someone else's failures on me, and presented it with such confidence that management believed her. My heart sank. But then, in the same moment, something inside me shifted. Up until then, I had been trying to ride out the storm, hoping it would pass if I kept my composure. But hearing them cite her lies as fact, hearing them say my name attached to work I hadn't even touched, that was the breaking point. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to keep my expression calm. Losing control would only feed the narrative she'd spun about me. Instead, I said evenly, "I understand your concerns. But I assure you, I was not involved in the Whitman account. If you check the project management system, you'll see my name isn't attached to it anywhere. I'd be happy to provide documentation to clarify my role. They nodded, still uncertain. But I knew the damage was already done. My name had been dragged through the mud, and each repetition of her lies made them more believable. When the meeting ended, I walked out with a tight smile, but inside, my hands were trembling. Not from fear anymore, but from resolve, because that was the last straw. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. This was about my integrity, my reputation, my career. If I let her continue, she wouldn't just steal the role I deserved, she would leave me with nothing. As I sat back at my desk, I glanced across the office. She was there, of course, chatting brightly with another coworker, her laughter carrying just enough to be heard. And then, almost like she felt my eyes on her, she turned her head and met my gaze. Her smile was smug, triumphant, and in that instant, I made a silent promise to myself. She might think she had won. She might think her lies were unshakable, but I was done being the quiet, patient friend who let her walk over me. From that moment forward, I wasn't just surviving her sabotage. I was preparing to fight back, and soon enough, I would find the very weapon I needed to bring the truth crashing down on her head. Asterisk: when you've been pushed to your limit, sometimes the smallest detail can suddenly transform into the spark you need. For me, that spark came one evening, long after most of the office had emptied out. I had stayed behind, as I often did, trying to quiet the storm in my head by pouring myself into work. My desk lamp was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across stacks of reports and sticky notes. My mind was replaying that evaluation meeting on a loop, every word, every doubt in my manager's eyes, every smug glance from her across the room. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion weighing on me, and then, without meaning to, my eyes drifted to the screen in front of me. The project management system was still open, our company's central hub for every task, every file, every comment. It was routine to me, almost invisible after so many years of using it. But that night, I noticed something I had always taken for granted: the little trail of time-stamped entries. Every keystroke, every edit, every upload was preserved with a username attached. It hit me all at once like a puzzle snapping into place. If she had been manipulating projects, if she had been sabotaging files or misrepresenting who did what, there would be a trail here. And unlike rumors whispered in hallways, unlike sly comments in meetings, this trail couldn't be twisted. It was black and white evidence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I opened one of the projects I had recently been accused of mishandling. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the history. And there it was. Entries under her name. Subtle edits that altered the final output just enough to create errors. At first glance, they looked like simple mistakes. But when lined up against my original work, the pattern was clear. She had tampered with my files. I sat back in my chair, my pulse thundering. A wave of emotions hit me: anger, yes, but also a fierce sense of clarity. She thought she was clever, thought her sabotage would go unnoticed. But she hadn't counted on the digital paper trail. I began documenting everything. One by one, I pulled up project histories, taking screenshots, compiling logs, carefully labeling dates and times. I saved copies to a secure folder, backing them up just in case. Each new piece of evidence felt like another brick in the wall. I was building a wall of truth she would never climb over. And then I remembered something else. An email she had sent weeks earlier. She had meant to forward it to another colleague but had accidentally copied me in. I had barely skimmed it at the time, assuming it wasn't important. But now I went back and reread it. My stomach flipped in the email. She was mocking me, calling me too slow to notice and bragging about how she had reframed things to make herself look better. It wasn't explicit, but paired with the project logs, it was damning. Proof not only of her manipulations but of her intent. I saved that email to my growing folder of evidence, my hands trembling slightly as I clicked the mouse. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. She had been playing a dangerous game, weaving lies into the fabric of our workplace. But she had forgotten that lies, no matter how clever, can't erase the truth that leaves its mark in hard data and careless words. That night, I closed my laptop with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The battle wasn't over, but I finally had a weapon. A unique weapon, something undeniable, something she couldn't spin or laugh off. She had chosen to stab me in the back, never imagining I'd have the means to hold the knife up to the light for everyone to see. And soon, very soon, I would use it. The day I chose to act was not random. Timing mattered. If I came forward too soon, she could claim misunderstanding, twist my words, or even destroy evidence before anyone had a chance to verify it. I needed her to feel certain of her victory, smug enough that her guard was down, while I quietly built my case. That moment came when word spread that management was close to finalizing their decision for the promotion. The tension in the office was thick, you could almost taste it. People whispered in corners, speculating who would get the role. She basked in the attention, carrying herself as though the decision had already been made, as if she were simply waiting for the announcement. I watched her carefully those days. Her laugh was louder, her confidence bolder. She looked at me with pitying glances, the kind people reserve for someone they believe has already lost. And I let her believe it. I let her savor her illusion of triumph. Meanwhile, I was preparing. I organized my folder of evidence into a clear, undeniable sequence. Screenshots of project histories showing her edits. Time-stamp logs highlighting when and how changes were made. Comparisons between my original work and the sabotaged versions. The email she had accidentally copied me on, mocking me while admitting to reframing work. Every piece was labeled, cross-referenced, and easy to follow. I wanted there to be no doubt, no wiggle room, no space for her to spin another story. When I finally requested a private meeting with my boss in HR, my hands were steady. I wasn't coming in as a desperate employee, begging to clear her name. I was coming in as someone holding the truth, calm and unshakable. We sat down in the conference room, the blinds drawn, the air heavy with expectation. I began by thanking them for their time, then said simply, I need to address the concerns that have been raised about me, and I have evidence I believe you'll want to see. I opened my laptop and walked them through everything. One by one, I laid the pieces out, explaining as I went, careful not to sound accusatory but factual. Here is the project history. You can see my contributions here. And then here, these edits made afterward under her account. Notice the changes. They introduced errors that were later blamed on me. They leaned forward, brows furrowed, scrolling through the entries themselves. I let the silence stretch, let the evidence speak louder than my words ever could. Next, I pulled up the email. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. I simply highlighted the section where she referred to reframing and read it aloud. By the time I finished, the room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. My boss's expression was dark, his jaw tight, or was scribbling notes furiously, glancing between me and the screen. Finally, my boss looked up. Why didn't you bring this forward sooner? I met his gaze steadily, because I wanted to be certain. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. But now, the pattern is clear, and it's been affecting not only my reputation but the integrity of our projects. There was a long pause. Then he nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling in. Leave this with us. We'll handle it. I closed my laptop, a sense of calm washing over me. For weeks, I had felt cornered, powerless, silenced by her lies. But in that moment, I knew the tide had shifted. I had done my part. I had put the truth in their hands. As I left the room, I caught sight of her across the office. She was laughing with a colleague, her posture relaxed, utterly unaware of the storm that was about to hit. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, because she thought she had outplayed me. She thought her lies were unshakable. But soon, very soon, she would realize that the truth had been watching her all along, and it was about to crash down on her harder than she ever imagined. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. The very next day, my boss sent a company-wide email announcing an urgent staff meeting. It wasn't framed as unusual. Management sometimes held briefings when deadlines shifted, or when big accounts were secured. But the tone of the email was sharper, more formal. You could feel the undercurrent. Something serious was coming. The office buzzed with speculation as people filed into the conference room. I took a seat near the back, deliberately keeping my face calm. She, on the other hand, strolled in with the confidence of a queen about to be crowned. Her heels clicked against the tile, her head held high. She smiled at colleagues, whispered small jokes, even patted one on the shoulder as if she were already their new leader. I watched her closely, memorizing every detail, because I knew what was about to happen. When everyone had settled, my boss stood at the front of the room, HR by his side. His expression was grim, the kind that silenced whispers instantly. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We've recently completed a review concerning allegations that were raised about the conduct of one of our employees. During that review, new information came to light that we feel is important to address openly." The air in the room shifted. You could feel the tension coil tighter, every person suddenly alert. She sat forward slightly, a faint smirk on her lips. She thought this was it, the moment I'd be paraded out, humiliated in front of everyone, while she stood untouched. But then my boss's gaze hardened. "It has become clear," he continued, "that the allegations were false. In fact, the evidence shows a deliberate attempt to undermine a colleague by falsifying project records and spreading misinformation." There was a ripple through the room, a collective intake of breath. Heads turned, eyes widened. Her smirk faltered and my boss went on, his voice firm. "The digital logs, project histories, and communications we reviewed leave no doubt. The employee responsible for this misconduct is," he spoke her name, sharp and unmistakable. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her face went pale, her eyes wide as though she hadn't heard correctly. Then, just as quickly, she tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "Wait, that can't be right. There must be some kind of mistake." But HR stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We have the documentation. Every edit, every change, every word is accounted for. These are your entries, under your account, time-stamped." "No," she snapped, her voice rising. "That's not possible. Someone must have hacked it, or altered the records." She turned to the room, desperate. "You all know me. I'd never." But the silence that met her was devastating. Colleagues avoided her eyes. A few shook their heads. They had heard her sly comments, seen her smirks, maybe even believed her lies. But now the truth was laid bare. Undeniable, my boss's tone cut through her protests like a knife. Enough. The evidence is clear. Your behavior is unacceptable, and there will be consequences. Her voice cracked as she tried again. This isn't fair. She set me up. She's been trying to make me look bad from the start. And finally, my boss turned to me. His eyes softened slightly, and he said, "No, she didn't set you up. She did her job with integrity, as she always has. And you tried to take that from her." The room was silent, all eyes on her as the weight of his words sank in. She sat frozen, her face twisted in disbelief. Rage flickered in her eyes, followed quickly by panic. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. For the first time since this all began, she looked powerless. And in that moment, watching her facade crumble, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not gloating, not triumph in the shallow sense, but justice. The truth had finally spoken, louder than her lies ever could. HR began outlining the disciplinary steps being taken against her, but the details blurred in my ears. What mattered wasn't just that she was being held accountable, it was that everyone now knew. Every single person in that room had witnessed her downfall, had seen the truth unmasked. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent weeks whispering in hallways, weaving lies into the fabric of our office, trying to poison my reputation. And in the end, her own actions had been exposed publicly, in front of the very people she'd tried to impress. Her downfall wasn't private. It was complete, humiliating, and most importantly deserved. As the meeting ended and people filed out, I stayed seated for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the reality of it sink in. It was over. She had tried to destroy me, but instead, she had destroyed herself. And that was the justice I had been waiting for. The meeting ended in a stunned silence, the kind that lingers even after words are finished. People shuffled back to their desks, whispering to one another, sneaking glances at her as she sat frozen in her chair. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting as if searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. I walked past her on my way out, not lingering, not gloating. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken louder than anything I could say. But in that brief moment, I caught the look in her eyes. Disbelief, desperation, and underneath it all, shame. Later that afternoon, an email went out to the entire staff. It was short, professional, but powerful in its simplicity. "We are pleased to announce that my name has been promoted to the position of manager, effective immediately. Please join us in congratulating her on this well-deserved achievement." I stared at the words on the screen, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief that weeks of tension had finally lifted. The office erupted with congratulations. Colleagues stopped by my desk, smiling warmly, offering genuine words of support. Some admitted quietly that they had doubted me because of the rumors, but were grateful to see the truth laid bare. Others simply clapped me on the shoulder and said, "About time." And her? She didn't look at me. She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she sat at her desk, her posture rigid, typing furiously as though pretending to be busy. But her hands shook as she hit the keys. The pride she had worn like armor was gone. In its place was a silence so heavy it was almost painful to witness. The irony was perfect. She had wanted that email to bear her name. She had lied, sabotaged, and schemed to claim it. And instead, those words, the recognition, the promotion, the validation, belonged to me. She couldn't undo it. She couldn't spin it. The entire office had seen the truth, and the decision was final. That evening, As I packed up my things to leave, I paused at the doorway and glanced back at the office. The atmosphere was different now. The cloud that had hung over me for weeks was gone, replaced by a new energy, one of respect, of trust, of clarity. I felt taller, lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been set down. And deep down, I knew the real victory wasn't just the promotion. It was knowing that she had tried to destroy me and failed, that her lies had collapsed under their own weight, that in the end, the truth had not only protected me but elevated me higher than I had ever been. She thought she could win by betrayal, but betrayal only carries you so far before it circles back, sharp as a blade, cutting down the hand that wields it. And that was the moment I finally allowed myself to breathe, to smile, and to step fully into the role I had earned, not because of her downfall, but in spite of it. In the days that followed, the office felt like an entirely different place. The tension that had weighed on me for so long seemed to dissolve overnight. For the first time in weeks, I walked into work without bracing myself for suspicious stares or whispered rumors. Instead, colleagues greeted me warmly, their respect genuine, their trust restored. I eased into my new role as manager with a quiet pride. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was steady, fulfilling, and earned. I threw myself into leading projects, mentoring younger employees, and proving day by day that the faith management had placed in me was well deserved. And as for her, her downfall was swift, and it didn't stop with the public confrontation. After the disciplinary action, she was removed from the promotion track entirely. She was reassigned to smaller, less visible projects, work that kept her out of the spotlight she craved. The shift was obvious. People who once laughed at her jokes or lingered by her desk now kept their distance. The charm she had wielded so effortlessly no longer worked, because everyone had seen the truth behind it. Within a few months, she resigned. Officially, she claimed she was pursuing new opportunities, but everyone knew the real reason. She couldn't stand the humiliation of staying in a place where her lies had been exposed. When I heard she had left, I felt no satisfaction in the petty sense, no smugness, just closure. She had written her own ending, and I had no part in it beyond refusing to let her destroy me. Life has a way of evening the scales. Betrayal, manipulation, cruelty, they might work for a time, but they always carry the seeds of their own destruction. She tried to climb higher by stepping on me, but all she did was dig the ground out from under herself. As I settled fully into my new position, I found myself reflecting on what had happened, not just the pain of the betrayal, but the lessons it left behind. I learned that silence isn't always strength. For too long, I had tried to endure her lies quietly, hoping the truth would surface on its own. But sometimes, you have to gather your courage, confront the storm head-on, and shine a light into the shadows. I also learned that people reveal who they are when ambition tests them. She had every opportunity to rise through hard work, through integrity, through the same patience and dedication that I had shown. But instead, she chose shortcuts paved with dishonesty. And in the end, those shortcuts led her nowhere. As for me, I came out of it stronger, not because it was easy, but because I refused to let her decide my story for me. Even now, years later, I think about those weeks sometimes. The long nights, the doubt, the sting of betrayal from someone I had once trusted. But I don't dwell on the pain anymore. What stays with me is the calm strength I found when I finally stood up, the undeniable proof that truth can cut through the loudest of lies, and the satisfaction of knowing I claimed my place honestly. The moral, I suppose, is simple. Trust is fragile, and betrayal never leads to lasting victory. In the end, the truth always surfaces. And when it does, it has the power to dismantle even the most carefully constructed lie. I earned my promotion the right way. She tried to steal hers the wrong way. And while my career blossomed, hers crumbled under the weight of her own choices. That is the justice of it all. Asterisk, don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.